Alrighty, I think we're recording right here. I'd like to introduce Colonel Malfer with the ROTC PAS at Embry-Riddle, and he will be giving you his hometown recovery here.
How's everybody doing?
Outstanding.
Great.
Outstanding, sir.
All right. Well, as Colonel People said, I'm Colonel Dennis Malfer. I'm the current ROTC commander out at Embry-Riddle. And he asked me last week to come and talk to you folks about a little bit about my career and what I've done and so forth. Now, when I look at somebody, and I do a lot of retirements since I've been in this Air Force, and one of the things that I look at is their past and what they've done. When you look at someone's history in terms of what they've done, that's how you can kind of gauge on how a person is and who he is, and kind of figure out from what part of the country he is based on what he's done. Having been in the Air Force for 26 years, I've been stationed in 17 different locations, and we'll go over some of that stuff. But what I'd like to tell you guys right now is I want to give you guys the opportunity to ask me questions. So if I talk to you guys about something and you have a question, raise your hand, because it's just not about me lecturing you. Twice a week I talk to the freshmen and teach them about the Air Force and how to speak in public and how to write Air Force stuff. So this is your opportunity to ask questions from someone who's not Colonel Peoples. I know he's got a great background to talk to you guys, but sometimes it's always good to get a different perspective. So when I look at the sheet of paper, I look at some of, where did I grow up and so forth. Well, first of all, I go way back. I was born in Lawrence, Kansas. Does anybody know where Lawrence, Kansas is? No, sure. Okay, it's right by Kansas City, Missouri. You guys familiar with that? If you can call the map up and he can show you exactly where it is. The reason I was born there is my father, who's not military, he was getting his PhD in organic chemistry, so he's a very smart man. And so I was born there during that time, and then when he received a job, I moved to St. Louis. So St. Louis, Missouri is my hometown. That's where I grew up. That's where whenever someone says, hey, where are you from, I say St. Louis. When you talk about baseball, we always think we're diehard baseball Cardinal fans. St. Louis, who won the World Series last year. So that's where I say I'm from, because I have a lot of history there, and I really had a great childhood growing up there. When I was a kid, I've always been fascinated with flying airplanes, or very fascinated with aviation. And my dad, who again is a chemist, has no flying background whatsoever, would always help me out with that, enhance it. He would, no kidding, when I was 7 or 8 years old, if there was a war movie on or had something to do, mostly John Wayne, whenever there was a war movie on, he would, no kidding, wake me up. And I thought it was really late. It was probably 9:30 or 10 o'clock. And I would sit there and watch the war movie with him. So I got really interested in flying airplanes. But I never really knew the military. I just liked to watch the movies. And so my dad used to take me to the airport, and I used to watch the airplanes take off and land. And I said, that is really, really cool. I mean, that is something I would really love to do. And so I growing up in high school all throughout, and I went to a Catholic grade school, and then I went to an all-boys Catholic high school. So, all-boys school, but at least I didn't have to take a shower in the mornings. That's kind of funny. But so while I was in high school, I still was considering flying airplanes. But I knew I wanted to be an engineer, so I knew I wanted to go to an engineering type school. And growing up in Missouri, there's a lot of really good engineering schools around there that I could go to. And I was a senior in high school, and a friend of mine who played soccer for the Air Force Academy came home he had a soccer game in St. Louis. They were playing St. Louis University. And he invited me out to dinner with the soccer team. So I'm sitting there eating dinner with them, and they said, have you ever considered the Air Force Academy? And I go, what's that? I have no military background. The only military background I have is my 2 great uncles who served in World War II. But I didn't talk to them about World War II because, again, I didn't know anything about the military. He said, you've always wanted to fly airplanes. This is your best opportunity to fly airplanes. So you need to go look at going to the Air Force Academy. I said, well, that sounds pretty neat. So then I went home and told my mom about it, and she and my dad helped me fill out the application. And so I applied to the Air Force Academy. Not knowing anything about the Air Force Academy, just knowing that I could fly airplanes. But then I started doing research and saw it was how cool it was in the military, and how neat it was to become like an officer in the Air Force. So I decided at that point that that's what I really wanted to do. Well, in April of that year, at my senior year, I got accepted. And so I knew I was going to the Air Force Academy. So now here I am going to the Air Force Academy, and let me tell you, when you do ROTC, and I'm talking ROTC in a college, you show up and they kind of help you through all this stuff, but they don't really push you too hard. They don't really yell at you or do anything to make you think twice about what you're doing. They kind of build you up until you get to about your junior year, and then you get the real big eye-opening experience when you go to field training, which is what Colonel Peebles did. When I showed up at the academy, I showed up in a bus with not long hair, but long hair for the Air Force standard, and next thing you know, I'm getting yelled at and doing push-ups. So I then realized at that point that what did I get myself into? But I will tell you this. There were so many times that I wanted to quit, and so many times I didn't want to stay there because of how hard it was and because of how I felt about the military, and everybody was yelling at me, and I was away from my friends and family. But I kept looking at that final goal, which was get to fly airplanes. So then, obviously bad things always turn into good. So by the end of my freshman year, a lot of cool stuff happened at the academy. They had a hell week where they push you for about 3 or 4 days, and then they recognize you. And then I became a recognized cadet. From that point on, it wasn't so bad. It was still tough going to school and graduating, but I still looked at my final goal, which was to fly airplanes. So when I graduated the academy, now I'm going to go get to go to pilot training. So I go to pilot training, and I go to, you guys familiar with Phoenix, Arizona? Down there, of course. I went to Williams Air Force Base, which is closed now, but it's, I guess you would call it, what town is that? Gilbert, that area. So I go to pilot training at Williams Air Force Base, and that whole year, it was the toughest year of my life. Tougher than the 4 years of the academy because you're always being graded. And so for that whole year, I was under a lot of stress. However, I kept looking at that goal of wanting to fly airplanes, and I did well enough that they gave me a fighter. So back then, they still had these airplanes called F4s, and so there was a couple of us that got an F4. So I go and fly F4s for my first tour. And that was a really fun assignment because here I am flying. Oh, by the way, going back to when I was with my father at the airport, flying airplanes, saw him take off and land, I saw an F4 take off because the National Guard was flying F4s. And I told my father, I said, when I get older, I'm going to fly that. He goes, son, they'll be gone by the time you get to fly airplanes.
You flew a Weasel, didn't you?
I did.
Like
so the first airplane I got out of pilot training was an F4. So I called my dad. He thought that was funny. And that's exactly when I flew right there. In fact, 263, that's what the Idaho Guard at the time, but that was one of the airplanes I flew, which is in fact, I flew that one in combat a few times. Yes?
I know that the regular F4s were retired sometime in the late 70s, but I know
the regular F4s were retired in the late 80s.
So like I was 85,
right.
08, graduated pilot training. I went straight to F4Es.
Right. They still had F4Es when I was flying it. I flew F4Es all the way up until 1990. And then they got rid of all the F4Es, and then they went to the F4Gs, which is a Wild Weasel. All it is just a really modified F4E. Yeah. And then I flew the F4G through that. Well, then I flew that for a tour, and then what was really neat is here I am, a second lieutenant. I'm 22 years old, and I'm flying this airplane, and 2 of the airplanes had MiG kills on it from Vietnam. And some of the instructors I flew with were fighter pilots from Vietnam, and one of them had a MiG kill. So that was pretty neat. So here I am. These guys are much older than I am, but I thought that was pretty cool. So from that point on, at this time, my wife also was an academy grad. So we graduated together and got married. And so she's flying. You guys know what 135s are? KC-135s?
Yes, sir.
You can call that up. It's an air refueling tanker. She was a navigator on that. So we were stationed together. And then at that point, we had to get another assignment. So I went to the Philippines. If you could show a map of there's the 135 right there. But if you could call up the Philippines, that's Phoenix. So I was stationed in the Philippines, and my wife was stationed in Okinawa, Japan, which is just north of the Republic of Philippines. During that time, I flew there for almost 2 years.
How do you spell Philippines?
Philippines. P-P-I-L-I-P-P, there we go. P-P-I-N-E-S.
Wrong Philippines.
There you go. Clear across the world. So I was stationed in the Philippines, and it was stationed at Clark Air Base, and so they had F4Gs there. Well, during that time there, Desert Shield, if you guys all remember Desert Shield, I don't know if you know any history about Desert Shield 1990 when Iraq invaded Kuwait, and we sent a bunch of Air Force and Army folks into Saudi Arabia. They needed pilots in there, so they sent some crews from the Philippines over to Bahrain. If you call it Bahrain, that's where I was stationed. It's on the east coast of Saudi Arabia. And so I went there and flew in Desert Shield and Desert Storm. And I flew 26 combat sorties over there while I was flying in Desert Storm. My wife was also flying in Desert Storm, and she flew tankers. And I will tell you this, during the war, before the day one of the war, this is what we were briefed, that we were probably going to lose 30 to 40% of all the support aircraft because they thought the Iraqis were going to come in and attack. Well, you can probably realize that I was pretty stressed out since my wife was flying a 135, which is a support aircraft, thinking that at some point she would get shot down. So I was, needless to say, going into combat, I thought my wife was going to fly into that position and get herself in harm's way. Luckily, it never happened, and so it was never something I had to worry about after the first week of the war when we realized that we were, doing a good job. So then I'm flying during that time, and actually my wife at one point refueled me on Valentine's Day, and she actually said Happy Valentine's Day to me in the middle of the war, on the radio. And let me tell you, my friends gave me so much trouble.
That's pretty good.
So they called it Love Connection in the Sky, and it made 60 minutes, and it made all kinds of things. It was kind of neat because, here she is. That was the closest I saw my wife in 7 months. And I didn't get to see her because it was at night. And so you can't see through the glass of the 135 when they're refueling me. But her plane actually refueled my airplane. So she helped me helped with the war. Also, when I was there, on one of the nights, I supported F-111's strikers, and I put myself in harm's way and received the Distinguished Flying Cross, which is the Air Force. It's a pretty high honor, and I was honored to get that. Again, I was just doing what any other fighter pilot or any other pilot in the Air Force would have done. To protect their fellow pilots and their fellow people. So that was an honor to be a part of that. After that, I went to fly T-38, so now I'm going to be an instructor pilot at Vance Air Force Base in Enid, Oklahoma.
Show them what a T-38 looks like.
Okay. So now I'm going to go fly T-38s, and I'm going to instruct, and I'm teaching brand new lieutenants who have just flown 6 months worth, and now they're going to fly these. They still fly these in pilot training. Yes?
T-38 looks sort of like the F-5 Tiger.
It is the F-5. In fact, they built the, I don't know which was first, the T-38 or the F-5, but they're very similar. In fact, the F-5, I think, was initially built after, when they built the T-38, they built a combat version of the T-38. So if you look at that, you can see the T-38, or the picture up here. In F-5, there's a few subtle differences. They have leading edge flaps on the wing, gives it a little more lift, it has different engines. They're a little bit different cockpit and displays because it's not a training aircraft. But yes, you were correct. So now I did that for about a year, and then I got a call saying that they needed F-4 pilots to go back to the Weasel, the F-4G, because they were running out of pilots because they didn't have anybody to fill those cockpits anymore because the F-16 was going to replace it, but they didn't have the airplane ready. So now I moved from Oklahoma, and my wife enjoyed it because I went from Oklahoma to Las Vegas. So I got to go to Las Vegas, which was a cool town. I got to do that for a couple years, flying F-4Gs. And in that meantime, I was in the desert flying combat sorties. I was spending 6 to 7 months per year in the desert. So they got a little bit old after a while. So now here I am in Las Vegas doing that, and I got offered to go fly Strike Eagles at Seymour. So now I go to Seymour Johnson on the East Coast to fly Strike Eagles. So now I fly, yes?
What aircraft replaced the F-4 at Nellis?
The F-4 just basically went away, and the F-16 Block 50 is now the new Weasel, and they still fly that today. So the F-4 was actually replaced by the F-16, but the actual Weasel, the F-4G Weasel, was replaced by the F-16 Block 50, which has now been flying for the last, 15 years, flying it, so they do a pretty good job. So after the Strike Eagle, while I was flying there, I went to the desert in that airplane, so now I have combat time in the F-4 and the F-15. I applied to the Thunderbirds, and I got picked up to be a solo pilot with the Thunderbirds. So I was number 6 for the Air Force Thunderbirds, and then my second year I moved up to be number 5. And in fact, if you look at that picture up here, this was me on the far right. This was me right here as number 6. And then the next year I moved up to lead solo, and then I stayed in that position, but now I'm 5. Does anybody know the big difference on the Thunderbirds, what they do with the number 5? Does anybody know? It's an upside-down 5 on the airplane, and it's also an upside-down number on the uniforms we wear. Because as number 5, I flew upside down so much that they put everything upside down, which is funny because when I left the Thunderbirds and I would go to the bank to cash a check, whenever I wrote a 5, I still was in the habit of writing, and I could say right now, C backward L. So that was an upside down 5 because I got so good at it that I started doing that, and the banker would look at it and go, "What is that?" Oops, sorry. And I had to concentrate on how to write an actual 5.
That's really, really funny.
But I tell you what, in the 2 years I flew with the Thunderbirds, it was a great assignment. You know, flying upside down at 100 feet and flying sneak passes over Chicago and flying through the buildings was the most awesome thing. However, the thing that I enjoyed the most was talking to students. Whether it was 5th graders or ROTC cadets or junior ROTC cadets, or I actually I talked to IBM execs. And the theme, talking to everybody, whether it was an IBM exec, everybody thought, you know, here I am talking to these IBM execs, and these guys make so much money that I don't think they know what to do with it. But they all looked at me and said, I would give every single cent up to do what you do. So I thought that was pretty cool. I said, really? How about if you just give me the money? And I get to keep doing what I'm doing. And I'll give them a ride. So we gave some rides to some of the guys that deserved it. But I did that for a couple of years. And then went back to the F-16. And now I'm flying in Albuquerque, flying F-16s with them for about 3 years doing that. And during that time, as you guys know, 9/11 happened, 2001. And I remember I was at my house in bed, and I get a phone call from my father, and I was in Albuquerque, so it was obviously East Coast time, so it was a little bit earlier, and I get a call from my father saying, turn on the TV. So I turned on the TV and watched that, and that was probably the most delightful, besides Desert Storm and having my kids, you know, and all that. 9/11 changed my whole aspect, my whole career, my whole life at that point, seeing what happened, that we were attacked. So the last time we were attacked was Pearl Harbor. So I get a call shortly thereafter saying, get in the squadron. And the first thing I did is I rushed to the base, and there was a line like a mile long because people were trying to get on base because nobody really knew what was going on. And the Air Force was locked down, but they saw my uniform, so they let me in front. As soon as I got there, I was strapping in an F-16, and I was flying straight and refueling and coming back and just flying around the clock. And flying with night vision goggles, and our job was to make all the airplanes land. And I'll never forget flying along one time, and I'm flying alongside of a little Cessna. A doctor was in there, and I'm telling him to land because we can't get a hold of him on the radio. So we'd have to fly by, and so that was, again, a life-changing event. So here we are flying caps over, and this time we flew caps over Phoenix, to be exact. We took off out of Albuquerque because at Luke, it's a training F-16 base. They don't have armament. They don't have missiles that can shoot down airplanes. God forbid we should have to shoot an airliner down. But so they asked us to do it because we had combat loads. So we took off and did caps over Phoenix for a while. So that was a different thing. And from that point on, started doing a lot of caps. And we actually flew over New York City. And do you guys remember at all? Have you ever seen the lights? They had these huge spotlights which represented the World Trade Center. And at night, you could see them when they shot up in the night. It was unbelievable how strong those lights were. There's a light they have at the Luxor in Vegas that shoots that light real high. You guys know that light?
Here it is right here.
There you go. I was flying at 20,000 feet, and I thought it was so cool to fly right through those lights. It felt like I was being abducted by aliens, you know, with the lights surrounding you. But it was an honor to do that. And I'll tell you this, we did this every night, but during the day, we drove up to New York because we were flying out of New Jersey. We went up to New York and went to Ground Zero, and there was a policeman there. You know, the whole site was roped off. And I was talking to the policeman, and I said, hey, we're the fighter pilots up there flying 24-hour caps for you guys. He goes, really? Come on in. So he actually let us go into Ground Zero and walk around Ground Zero. And it was. And here's what that still gives me that feeling. Yeah, 4 times while we were there, they found remains. And when they found a remain, whether it was a tooth or a fingernail, didn't matter. Everybody stopped work. And everybody took their hats off to honor that person. It's pretty cool. So, I mean, no matter, there was thousands of people in there. I mean, thousands. But as soon as they saw and everybody knew they would stop, everybody would stop. The entire work crew. To honor the people that had been killed. That was pretty neat. That was another one of those, wow. And I was privileged to be able to go see that firsthand. And so, it means a lot when I see all the stuff going on and the new World Trade Center memorial and stuff that they have, which is pretty cool.
Have you seen that new thing they came up with called the Never-Ending Pool?
Yes. I didn't get to see it firsthand, but I saw the memorial last year when they had the 10-year anniversary, and they turned the water on for the first time, and I watched the whole, I think it was Discovery Channel or one of the channels.
My dad was there for that. He took a video of it and everything. He said it was one of the most...
It's probably surreal. I mean, it was just unbelievable how cool it was.
He said it was dead quiet. I mean, if you dropped a needle, you could have heard it from miles around.
Right, that's pretty neat.
Insane. Yeah, it was pretty cool.
You know, that's one of the things that's one of the things that is great about this country is that, you know, everybody, we get to the point where we kind of forget things and we start to kind of feel like nobody likes us and we don't get along, but then something like this happens and we become one again. And unfortunately, I wish it could be like that all the time, but what happens is people go on with their lives and they feel like, you know, well, it's my turn to do things, and then something big happens and then they
band together.
Then they band together. And so, as I always say when I see that, don't mess with the U.S.
Yeah, pretty much.
Put us together. If you put us in line together, we'll nobody can beat us. So anyway, I did that for a while, and then after that, I received another assignment, and a really cool assignment. I get to go to Hawaii. So I moved to Hawaii, and now my job is, they call it, I'm the chief of stand eval for F-16s. I'm an F-16 guy. What it is my job is to go around all of the Pacific, to include Korea, Japan. These are American bases in Korea, American bases in Japan, and Alaska, and give rides to the F-16 pilots to make sure they're doing things right. Give them check rides, give them tests. So I went all around. So I traveled a lot. So that was pretty cool. I got to go to 2 Korean bases, which are one's near Seoul, Osan Air Base, and another one is Kunsan. So if you can look those up. Osan is about 2 hours south of the DMZ, and Kunsan's about 5 hours south of DMZ. So I got to fly there, and I also got to fly in Misawa, Japan, which was the Block 50 F-16. So now that I flew F-4Gs as a Wild Weasel, now I'm flying F-16s as a Wild Weasel. And by the way, while I was in my assignment in Albuquerque, I got to fly in Iraq, so I got to go there and fly combat sorties there. Yes?
You said that you served in Hawaii for a brief time. Where were you based?
Hickam Air Force Base.
I live just a little ways away on the Big Island.
Big Island? Okay. Big Island's away, it's southeast of Oahu. Oahu's the main area where Honolulu is, and Waikiki. And that's where the Army base, big, huge Army base, Schofield. And then they have Hickam, and then they have Pearl Harbor. You guys, I hope, are familiar with Pearl Harbor, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Well, now the base is no longer called Hickam Air Force Base. It's now called Joint Base Pearl Harbor Hickam. What they did is they combined the bases, and now the Navy runs the base, but we still have the Air Force section and the Navy section. Obviously, the Air Force section is the airfield, and the water section is the Navy. There you go. It would have been kind of difficult to do the other way around. Yeah, I can't take off on water.
I mean, how can we take off on water?
Well, you could, but the problem is that if you took off like an F-16 with the pontoons, it's just too much drag, and it really can't fly. And it wouldn't look cool. So I did that for a couple of years, flying, around there. But it was a really good assignment. But I was traveling a lot, and I was busy. I was in Japan and Korea a lot, and Alaska. Well, the next assignment in 2005, I was selected to become a commander, or to go to the command, flying F-16s at Luke Air Force Base, down here in Glendale, just about 2 hours south of here. So I was stationed there for 3 years, and I got to fly and train students. I flew as an operations officer and then as a squadron commander. And that was a really neat assignment. For 3 years, I got to fly F-16s, and I got to fly with a lot of lieutenants and I got to also teach instructors and so forth, and also teach a lot of colonels and generals when they're coming back to learn. So that was a really good assignment. But the only problem with Phoenix is during the summer, it's hot. And that's why I like Prescott, because it's so much nicer in the summertime.
It never changes.
It doesn't.
It's normal.
Yeah, but Hawaii never changes.
What?
Hawaii never changes.
Really? It's humid?
Humid year-round. So anyway, here I am at Luke for 3 years, and now I make colonel. I make 06, so I get an assignment. Guess where I get an assignment to? Hawaii. So now I go back to Hawaii again, and that's where I spend the next 4 years. Well, my family did. I first went there and ran all the operations for all of the Pacific. And then I was selected to be the vice wing commander at Kunsan Air Base, which is, again, in Korea. and now I get to be the second guy in charge. And the Kunsan Air Base, which is called the Wolf Pack, because back in Vietnam, there was a guy named Robin Olds, and for any guy who flew fighters in the Air Force, Robin Olds is revered. He is like the most revered fighter pilot in all of flying. He flew in World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. He was a wing commander at Kunsan, and because of the tenacious fighting capability of the Wolf Pack, of the 8th Fighter Wing, they call it the Wolf Pack. So whenever you talk to anybody in the Air Force and you talk about flying F-16s and say, hey, were you a Wolf Pack member? You never say, hey, were you in the 8th Fighter Wing? No, were you with the Wolf Pack? So it's pretty cool that you're part of that. And I got to be the second guy in charge, but I also got to fly F-16s 2 and 3 times a week and then get to run the base, which is actually kind of neat. So I did that for 1 year because it's remote. Unfortunately, I was away from my family, so that made it a little bit difficult. Yes?
What made him so revered? David Olson was his name?
No, Robin Olds.
Robin Olds. What made him so revered?
He was a great leader. He was not only a great fighter pilot, he could fly, and I'm going to compare him better than Chuck Yeager. I know some people are probably going to, roll over their graves, or all these old guys are going to look at me and find me. I think Robin Olds, based on who he was and his leadership capability, answer your question in just a second. Robin Olds was, not only was he, when you talk about a leader in the Air Force, you need to be a good pilot. That's a given. But if you're a good pilot and not a good leader, it's not a good match. But if you're a great fighter pilot, but you can also lead people, and you can, be that person that everybody looks up to.
Perfect wing commander.
Wing commander. He was the number one guy. Everybody, they would do anything for him. They would, anything for this man.
Just charge straight into the jaws of death. That's what
exactly. He was a stud. And in fact, we met him in Albuquerque, and at one point we're inside there, we're just kind of hanging out and so forth in the Heritage Room, and anytime he opened his mouth to talk, there'd be loud buzzing and stuff. As soon as he opened up his mouth, everybody would, it was like a pin could drop.
Yeah.
And you would hear it for miles, because all of a sudden everybody would listen to him. Yep.
Wow.
So that was neat. I got to do that. Well, after I finished that tour, because my family was still in Hawaii, I moved back. I was stationed again in Hawaii. Again. So now I go from Hawaii to Korea, and my family stayed in Hawaii because I was by myself, and then I go back to Hawaii. And now my job is what they call anybody know what it's called the Inspector General. I was a guy in charge of, remember I told you I had stand about, I gave check rides? No, that's medical field.
Okay.
The Inspector General, my job is to make sure that every base in the Pacific was combat ready. I was in charge of the inspectors that would go to all these bases, and we would put on a mock war. And I was in charge of that for 2 years.
Honestly, kind of like war games.
Yes, kind of like going to Nellis, but it's everybody plays. Not only do the fighter pilots play, but the whole base. For instance, if you're getting attacked, the security forces would be ready to defend the base. If somebody got hurt, the Surgeon General or the medical folks would take care of it. So everybody played this simulated war game, and so we would give them that test.
Well, what I was comparing it to was like the Inspector General is over everything, like the Surgeon General is over all medical inspectors, over everybody else.
Correct.
That is checking the bases. Okay.
Absolutely.
That's the comparison I was making, not the medical.
That's a good comparison. So I took care of all that. And so I did that, and then put an application to come here. Prescott actually was was a very high recommended area because of the location, and because of Embry-Riddle has a great reputation for the detachment. One of the largest detachments in the nation. There's only 26 positions in the Air Force today that are colonel positions for ROTC. Not for junior ROTC, for ROTC. And Embry-Riddle is one of them. There are 1,700 students in Embry-Riddle. 260 of them are cadets. ASU, 40,000 students. 110 cadets.
You're kidding me.
No.
Is that because of the selectivity they have, or just the kids not joining?
Just kids not joining. Embry-Riddle is a very prestigious school, engineering school, and it's one of the detachments that is very well known. And when I applied to it, there were 162 of us that applied to this. There were 9 positions open. There was Embry-Riddle. There was also CU in Boulder. There was Florida State. BYU.
Boulder's in Las Vegas.
No, Boulder. You're thinking Boulder, Las Vegas. No, this is Boulder, Colorado.
Oh, okay. I see that.
The Colorado Buffaloes,
Oh,
CU Buffaloes. So those schools opened up. So there was 162 colonels that put in their packages to do this, and they selected 9. And I was selected to go to Embry-Riddle, so I was pretty happy. So we moved up here in mid-July from Hawaii, and so everybody thinks, wow, what a big difference. Hawaii. Hawaii was fun, but Hawaii's fun to go vacation. It's not really fun.
It's not good to live year round.
Nah, because it's boring. The weather's perfect every day.
You're right, that would get boring.
But it's one of those things that you go through, we like it here just because of it's different. You know, it's a small town. This is the first base this is the first assignment I've ever been to where they don't have an Air Force base. It's weird.
In Prescott?
Yeah, there's no Air Force base. And so, for instance, for all medical needs, we go to all the civilian stuff. Anything we have to do has to be done through civilian.
Like YRMC or that sort of thing?
Yep. And everything. There's no Air Force. Our servicing base is Luke. And I can't, if I have to go get a physical, I do that once a year, but I have to drive 2 hours down there. But if I get sick, I just go right here to the medical center and get taken care of. And the Air Force does take care of you in that regard. We can go to any doctor we want. We can do all that stuff. So it's kind of neat.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Now I'm going to open up for questions, but I also have some other stuff I can talk to you about. If you guys don't have questions, I can continue on talking. So please feel free to ask me any questions, whether it was about where I grew up or what I did. Yes?
What kind of mission did you need to so much fly across?
I was Wild Weasel, and it was over in Baghdad. And there's a air base there called Al Taqaddum. It's in Iraq. It's on the west side of Baghdad. All the flyers called it Al Taqaddum. And they had some big SAM sites there, and the F-111s were coming in to drop laser-guided bombs on the target there. And they had a SAM site there that was engaging them, and 2 of them had to drop their ordnance and leave. So I went in and started playing a cat-and-mouse game with this SAM site. So now the SAM is looking at me going,
Explain what a SAM is.
I'm playing with a surface-to-air missile because that's what we do. He's going, what is this guy doing? And then he turned himself away from me, and I knew that because we weren't getting his signal, and then I hear another F-111 go defensive. So that's when I decided I needed to take drastic action. I didn't have any missiles left to shoot him because we had this thing called a high-speed anti-radiation missile, which we would shoot if his radar was up, and it would go in and home in on the radar site and blow it up. Yes?
I heard the missile is called the HARM, isn't it?
Yes, high-speed anti-radiation missile, so it's all the harm.
I heard that it was the reason why B-52s lost their tail guns.
What do you mean lost their tail guns?
B-52s had tail guns, and they took them all off because a HARM was accidentally launched and hit a B-52.
No, I'll explain that. No, it did not. I'll explain that to you. We call that that's a rumor that was dispelled very quickly. But I agree. I heard that a HARM actually homed in on the tail gunner, but they didn't have tail guns back then. They got rid of all the tail gunners. Tail gunners have been gone because back in the day, back in the 50s and 60s, they needed tail gunners because they were afraid they were going to go into Russia and be attacked by MiG-25s and so forth. But they figured out in Vietnam that none of the airplanes would go up to attack them, so they no longer needed a tail gun. It was just a matter of getting rid of it. They used to be, in the old days, they used to sit in the back like a tail gunner, and like the old, what was that movie, Memphis Belle?
I love that movie.
Great movie. Remember the guy in the tail gun that was, what was his name, the singer? Married to a Victoria's Secret model. Anyway, he was in the back acting as the tail gunner of B-17. And the B-29, they had that, and then they got more sophisticated technology. So now he sat up front with a radar, and now the gunner was all by radar sight. And then they got rid of it altogether because they no longer needed the gun on it. But it did not happen. It was actually shot down it was actually hit by AAA, the tail, because the tail came off. Because a friend of mine was in Diego Garcia, the little island over in the west side, and he was flying out of there to Iraq, and he was on that mission. When the B-52s first started flying in Desert Storm, they would fly low. Then they realized that the AAA was beating them up, so they climbed back up high because we told them to go up high because they were afraid of the SAMs, but because we were there. Not one airplane was shot down by a surface-to-air missile site when there were weasels in the area during Desert Storm.
Anti-aircraft artillery.
Anti-aircraft artillery, right. AAA, the guns that aren't...
I got that. I didn't know if anybody else did that.
Good call. But yeah, those are the guns. Like AAA, it looked like fireworks. We had to fly through that all the time, but you just kind of try to get away from it. But
I think of AAA, I think of like car insurance.
Yeah, no, if you get a flat tire, they come out and place it
yeah,
for you.
pretty much.
Yeah, I don't think these guys in the AAA would come out and help you. And I'll tell you a quick story about AAA in a second from a friend of mine who flew A-10s. But anyway, to go back to the F-111s,
Yeah.
So I realized that I needed to do something, but I didn't have any ordnance left. So what I did is I rolled in on him. This is at night. I rolled in on him, pretending I was going to drop bombs on him. And then he shot all those missiles at me. But luckily, because I was so close to him, the missiles were too close to me, so they couldn't maneuver against me. So when I pulled on the stick, my back seater hit his helmet on the front of the radar scope and cracked his helmet because I hit it so hard. He started yelling at me.
How many Gs you pull?
Well, the airplane's, it has a limit of 9 Gs, but it was pegged over 9. So I broke the airplane up a little
over
bit.
9 Gs.
Well, we do that in the F-16 all the time. That's nothing.
Yeah, that's nothing. Oh God.
But so I rolled it on him. He shot all the missiles, and when he did that, he basically lost all his capability, the ordnance to shoot. So all the rest of the guys got in. So I came back and I was just talking to my commander about it, and he thought that was
Really cool.
pretty cool. So he put me in for the Distinguished Flying Cross, and I received it at a huge retreat ceremony at Vance Air Force Base in front of the whole wing. And the wing commander pinned me on, and he was really cool because he was a Vietnam vet. That was really cool. Yes.
When you pull 6 Gs, doesn't it knock you unconscious or something like that?
No, in the F-16, when I was flying with the Thunderbirds, I would pull 9 Gs all the time, probably 20, 25 times during the sortie. You prepare for it because you wear a G suit. Have you ever rode an amusement ride where it spins around and then the floor drops out?
Yeah.
That's about 1.5 Gs. You notice how you put your hand out here and it's hard to move back and forth because it's the Gs. That's about a G and a half. Now multiply that and do 9 Gs. But you practice for it. I didn't go into pilot training.
I couldn't just walk out and do 9 Gs right now.
I couldn't do that right now.
My head's gonna implode.
I would have to practice a lot more because I haven't flown in a couple of years. And I haven't pulled 9 Gs.
How would you practice something like that?
You just go out there and don't pull as many Gs, and you just work your way up again. You know, you start with 3 Gs, 4 Gs, 5, and then you pull 6. Then you go through, and then you start pulling more and more to the point where you can actually sustain 9 Gs, and it's okay. In fact, when I was flying with the Thunderbirds, I pulled Gs so much, and I got so used to it that I remember talking on the radio pulling 9 Gs. And then I was actually thinking to myself, I probably should be straining, trying to keep the blood out of my head, but my body was so used to it. It's probably not
You're
good
just
for
like,
me.
oh hey, what's up? Yeah, I'm pulling 9 Gs.
I'm thinking in about 10 years that my heart's just going to disconnect from my body and go to my stomach. So yes.
How many Gs can the F-16 pull?
9 Gs is what it's limited to, but the max Gs you can pull when it's clean is 9.5. It can actually handle more than that, but that's what the computer has said. We call it HAL.
Limiter, yeah.
Yeah, it's a limiter. I know these are old movies, but do you remember that movie,
Yes, I know exactly
Space
what you're
Odyssey?
talking about how.
What are you doing, Dave? So the same thing when we're flying F-16s. If you're pulling too much, they go, "What are you doing, Dennis?" So don't pull so much. But yeah, it's a computer that controls how many Gs you pull with the airspeed versus your angle of attack and so forth. So it's all computer generated. Yes.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
So, which aircraft in the U.S. Air Force can pull the most Gs?
F-16.
Really?
Yep.
I've heard
The F-22 is set about the same as the F-16.
I've heard stories about the F-15 pulling 12 Gs.
Oh yeah, but the F-15 was.
That's an emergency, and that's a dangerous situation. You break the plane, just like you said.
Yeah. In an F-15, the difference between F-15 and F-16 when it comes to pulling Gs is the F-15 doesn't have a limiter, doesn't have a computer. Now it has all these computers to keep it flying well, but it doesn't have a limiter. So you have to have a lot more. You have to have a feel for the jet a lot more in the F-15 than the F-16. When I was flying the F-15, if I was at a certain airspeed and I pulled back too hard on the stick, you would over-G it. Then you had to come back, and then you just have to check to make sure we didn't rip any panels. In the F-16, it's all done by a limiter. The problem is, when I was flying the F-15, when I was instructing, and F-16 guys came in to fly the airplane, they were always over-G'ing it. Because in the F-16, you can do whatever you want with it and not worry about it. In the F-15, you had to worry about it. So they just would pull over-G it, and I'd have to tell them to slow down and get to a speed where no matter how hard they pull, they couldn't over-G it. Yes?
But the limiter in the F-16, it won't stop you from over-G'ing it.
Yes, it will.
It won't let you do it?
No.
Oh.
When you pull on that stick, if you're a clean jet and you're going, 600 miles an hour, you can pull 9.4 Gs, but it's still not considered an over-G. Now, here's where you over-G the F-16. Now let's put 2 wing tanks on the aircraft. Now let's put 2 2,000-pound JDAM GPS bombs on the aircraft. And let's throw an ECM pod, electronic countermeasures pod. Now the jet's limited to 5.5 Gs. So if you pull too hard, you pull over 5.5 Gs, guess what? You just over-G'd it because the computer knows it, but it can't limit you. That's why you go to different categories, but it still can't detect what kind of bombs you're carrying. So yes, you can over-G it if you put a lot of stuff on the airplane. Yes?
What, to the best of your knowledge, is the most amount of Gs you pull? Even if it's over, what's the most amount you've possibly done?
Oh, me?
Yes.
I would guess probably in my lifetime I'll pull close to 9.6, 9.7 Gs.
That's the top amount you pulled.
Yeah, you can't gauge anything higher than that because after that it's just, it hurts.
You can't train for that.
You just can't train for that. I mean, you know, when I was training with the Thunderbirds and we would go out there and I was flying twice a day, every day, and we're practicing all these different maneuvers, it's just constant the same thing. Like they did this maneuver where you come in at the crowd and used to do this thing called a crossover break.
When you're doing this.
Well, you know, it looked like they were going to hit each other, right? Well, you know how you make the cheat to make it look that way is this was number 6 and here's number 5. So if you look at it from this perspective, number 6 or 5 was flying here, number 6 was flying back. So this is what the crowd sees. So if he just flew level with this guy and he flew back, you would see this. So what he did was he flew a little higher. When he flies a little higher, no kidding, the illusion is that he's flying forward, even with the guy. So you got really good at doing what they call cheats. So that when you cross, he's actually back here. So when you cross, now think of this way. You're 150 feet above the ground. So you're looking at me from 150 feet below me. 150 feet, right? So you're sitting there at ground level. I'm 150 feet above you. So now so he goes a little bit higher. So now it looks like this. So if we crossed and I crossed directly behind his tail, it would look like this to you. Because look at the angle. Just look at geometry of it. You're 150 feet lower. So now it looks that way. So what you got to do is climb higher. So you got to make the hit at the top portion of the tail. So if this is the top portion of the airplane, when he crossed over that, here's the tail. He had to fly it. The second stripe is what we usually gauge it off of. So that he flew above it. So that when you saw it from here, it looked like this. Pretty amazing, huh?
Crazy.
And that's what you have to practice
You guys
like.
ever hit either one of your jet wash? Isn't it?
Oh, yeah, jet wash all the time.
Jet
Yeah.
wash.
We've actually dinged a few wingtips too. It's not good. Yes?
You said that the Raptor is limited to about the same amount of G's as the...
9 Gs, yes.
I actually saw on the internet a video that stated that no matter what, the F-22's computer will not let you overshoot the aircraft.
Correct. It's the same computer with a little bit update than it's Lockheed. It's an F-16. It's just a big, heavy, stealthy F-16.
I've heard the F-22 Raptor can outbeat a flight of F-15s. Can literally like sit in the middle of them as they're flying and not even be detected at all.
Sure.
That's what I've heard anyway.
Without getting into any classified stuff, you can take 2 Raptors against 8 Eagles or 8 Vipers, against 8 Fulcrums, against 8 Flankers, and beat up everybody without even batting an eyelash. And that's why, don't mess with us. Don't mess with the U.S.
And that's why my uncle, he works at Embry-Riddle. He went to Embry-Riddle, and a lot of his friends.
And a lot of them probably did a lot of engineering for that stuff, for stealth and for...
Absolutely. He had a lot of friends who had a lot of stuff they couldn't talk about. So every time someone be talking down about the Air Force, they'll say F-22 Raptor, and they'll go, oh, damn.
Yeah, exactly. You're right. Yes.
So they'll be like, that's right.
What's the most amount of G's anyone has in the history of...
Good question. I don't know. I think in the 1960s, back in the day when we thought that, that we would test nuclear bombs with people watching it was okay. I think they did what they call the acceleration sled, and I think to test an ejection seat, like from the F4, when an F-16 or an F-15, the seat or F-22, when the pilot ejects, it's not in the old days it was just 2 rocket blasts, and fire you out of that airplane, and you pull, it's instantaneous 40 Gs.
Wow.
Instantaneous, which means you don't have a chance to pass out. But here's the difference. 40 Gs on your body hurts. And if you're not in the proper position, it hurts even more. I've had friends eject out of an F4 who have hurt their back and to this day still hurt. And they were 23 years old when they did it. I've had friends eject and they still to this day have backs and necks that just are hurting. But they did an acceleration and a decel, and that was back in the day. I think they pulled like 30 Gs, and I don't know what happened to the guy, but yeah, it was horrible.
And also, I was bored one day, so I searched atomic bombs, and I saw a video of an atomic bomb or a nuclear bomb being shot or whatever.
Exploding?
Above a crowd of people.
It wasn't above a crowd of people. There were people watching from a distance. And they had the special glasses on. And if they did it above the people, it wasn't in the U.S., I can tell you that. I mean, we were bad in the 50s and 60s with experimentation, but not like that.
Come watch a nuclear weapon.
Come watch a nuclear weapon. But I'm sure that there's a lot of residual radiation that hit those folks because they were too close, and it was probably not a good
Now,
thing.
you may not realize, but there's a whole segment of population here who's got money because of fallout.
Because of fallout, absolutely, but I'm saying it wouldn't be right above them. If it was right above them, they would have been incinerated.
Okay.
But yeah, there's a lot of them that are close enough that they get the radiation and they've been getting money for it. Yes.
What he said about the Raptor is true. I've heard that when it was first combat tested against F-15s, one Raptor went up against 5 Eagles, and none of the Eagles ever saw it the entire time.
Well, that's yes and no. I used to work on the Raptor. I worked in F-Tech in Albuquerque, and I was an engineer pilot guy working with the F-22, and I was out there flying with it and testing all the stuff. We went and did all that. So yes, you are correct in some ways, but be careful what you hear about rumors. Okay, sometimes if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is too good to be true. So I will tell you that, yes, it is a very, very effective weapon. And the reason why it's very effective is because of the new technology. Now, the difference is, in F-16 clean, you can't see. But who flies into combat with a clean F-16? So you're going to put all this ordnance on it. The difference is, in the F-22, all the ordnance is internal. So the only really time that it's very stealthy, it's very, an airliner, some of these small airliners are very tough to see because they're very smooth. But the F-22 is like that because all their ordnance is internal. So no matter what it carries, it's still stealthy. So yes, it is. You are correct in some ways, but remember, it's not the end-all be-all weapon system. It does have its issues.
Drawbacks.
It has a lot of
4 minutes.
Yeah, there's a lot of drawbacks with those airplanes, especially with new technology, just because it's really difficult for us to.
I'm sure you're not at liberty to say those drawbacks.
Yeah. Well, they've had a problem, and it's been in the press about the oxygen system because they fly really high, and so they've had problems with the oxygen because it's a new system in the airplane.
Absolutely.
So they've had problems with it. You had another question?
I was just gonna say it does carry all its ordnance internally, but it can carry external ordnance.
It only does that. The only time an F-22 would carry external something would be when it's traveling from point A to point B. It could throw some tanks on there for fuel, so you get some longer range, so that it doesn't have to refuel. But that's the only time. The rest, it's too difficult to throw ordnance on it. They wouldn't do it. Not in a combat situation. All right, last question.
We have 2 minutes.
2 minutes. Ask the all-knowing question that's going to just sum up this whole last hour.
How, in all, how do you like being at Embry-Riddle?
I've only been there for 2 months. I think it's a great school. It's a very.
I'm saying, what's your feel of it so far?
It's a great school, and I'll tell you why I like it. Because the school in itself supports the military so well. I mean, they're one and the same. The executive vice president, the guy in charge there. The reason why he's not the president is the president's down in Daytona Beach. That's where the biggest Embry-Riddle is. But he was a retired Air Force. He was a B-52 pilot. 26 years in the Air Force, 25 years in the Air Force. So the amount of help, and everybody there is very supportive. And again, it's 1,700 students, 265 of them are cadets, and it's a great school. It's got a great education. It's a very expensive school. So if anybody applies to it, you want to get if you go through the ROTC program, you want to get a
Scholarship?
Yeah, scholarship, but high school scholarship, which is the type 1, which can pay for everything. I mean, Embry-Riddle is expensive. It's upwards of $30,000+ a year. Anybody here have any military family at all? Anybody have parents in the military?
No.
Parents? Mom or dad?
Dad?
Do you have any brothers and sisters?
Well, my brother's going into, hopefully, Embry-Riddle.
Well, do you have you have the GI Bill, right?
Yeah, but he's getting the scholarship, so...
He's on scholarship, which is good. What I'm saying, I have 2 kids, and I've split my GI Bill up for both of them, so they each get 2 years' worth of free pay from the military, from the government. It pays for 2 years of any school they want to go to include Embry-Riddle, full ride for 2 years. Okay. Thanks, guys.
Doesn't Embry-Riddle chip in some extra monies, admissions, if you have like different types of loans?
Yes and no. I mean, they have.
help you out.
Here's what I'll tell you: if you get a Type 1 scholarship, which is basically, if you have like about a 3.7 to 3.8 in high school, and you apply to a Type 1 scholarship, you can apply to a Type 1 scholarship to any school in the country. What Embry-Riddle will do for you is a Type 1 pays for the school, but they will also pay your room and board and give you money for
They really want to
living
encourage
expenses.
the ROTC kids to go there, yeah.
Yeah, the ROTC kids. So they'll pay for that. And now I'll tell you that for Type 1 scholarships, this freshman class of 110 that started, now we have 89. Only 3 of them on high school scholarships. Actually 2. The rest of them are on what they call a Type 2, which pays $18,000 a year, which is about half the
Cost.
tuition. So, good schools out there.
All righty, well, thank you very much. I'll make a round of applause. Please.
Yes, sir.
Flight, Hudson, Hood. Dismiss.
Go to great day.